Welcome back. It is 7 past the hour. You are still listening to the Malloy program. Last night, when we had several various eyewitness reports about what was going on with the Occupy May Day demonstrations and celebrations in this country, we commented, of course, on how the cameras always go to the violence. And no matter how minuscule or inconsequential the, quote, violence, end quote, may be. Now, I'm not minimizing violence that can occur at demonstrations. No, not at all. But the point I was trying to make, and I truly believe this, the people who are involved with Occupy are not the type to use these kinds of tactics. There obviously is a very serious attempt, as there always has been, in mass movements. An attempt by the authorities, by right-wingers. In this case, it's my understanding that this filthy, vomitous Glenn Beck has been urging people to get involved in these demonstrations and do just this. So you can see Beck's hand on this. If Breitbart were not dead, you would see Breitbart's hand in it. This is what these rat bastards do. But we talked about this last night, about how to contain. Is there any way that Occupy can contain this kind of violence? Or neutralize it? Or short-circuit it? Or back in the day, you would say, well, surround the people doing this and love bomb them. Yeah, there's a term from the 60s, the 70s, the more neurotic. Well, we're going to love bomb them. How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to surround them and just love them. How'd that work out? Not very well. You know, my theory is surround them and fist bomb them. But, you know, that's violence. And, you know, some right-wing turd now will put that on his website. Lib talker says beat Occupy dissenter. Go ahead, jerks. Put it out there. You know, always brings in more audience. But so we batted this around, so to speak, and I got a couple of emails regarding that that came in overnight. This is from Reg at TV News Live. Mike, we had hundreds of thousands of people march against the war, Iraq war, in NYC and Washington over and over without incidents of any kind. See, she's pointing out you don't have to go back to the 70s. You go back to the early part of this century, this decade. No, this century. Of course, Reg goes on, we also got no coverage from corporate media. And Twitter and Facebook had not yet been developed. So there was nothing of interest to report. Hundreds of thousands of people march against the war? Yawn. Times have changed. This is a great news story to discredit Occupy. It is as contrived and coordinated as all the daily so-called news broadcasts on the infotainment networks that pass as news sources. Every major TV and print outlet has focused on the, quote, violence, end quote, and the arrests. Photos of police confronting protesters are everywhere. This is a setup. The May Day Occupy protests yesterday were international. You know for sure that not a single foreign protest will be shown. Same old, Reg. Well, that's the part. If we had a responsible news media in this country, if we had responsible reporting. Now, again, let me say, because I don't want to just blanket everyone who is involved in what passes for journalism today as being inept, incompetent, corrupt, and unable to flesh out the truth. Some writers, some photojournalists still are able to do that. They are very, very, very few. As far as mass consumption news is concerned, though, it's all garbage. You know it as well as I do. You know that. You know it's garbage. I'm not going to go, the corporate media, the right-wing media, the liberal media, although I drop those terms in sometimes. But you know as well as I do that what passes for mainstream media these days is totally ineffective, corrupt, does not do what the First Amendment charges it to do by implication. So this idea that Americans are getting a full picture of what's happening with Occupy is simply not true. Simply not true. Kevin wrote in about the answer to violence at marches. Kevin writes, Mike, though the majority of the Occupy movement is nonviolent, a few factors almost make violence inevitable. 1, as you said, agents, provocateurs, and infiltrators have and always will infect the ranks of any movement. 2, police are often police often initiate the violence with no provocation whatsoever. 3, given this, sooner or later, someone from Occupy is bound to react to that violence, particularly when the police violence is directed toward women and elderly or disabled persons. How long would it take you to react if the police began manhandling Kathy and pepper spraying her without her doing anything at all? I may be more cynical than most, Kevin writes, but I believe that Occupy is a life and death struggle for the basic human rights of all Americans to be upheld. I believe that violence, though I don't advocate it, is bound to happen, mostly on the police side, as we have seen. But eventually, anyone gets tired of being beaten up and pepper sprayed, while they continually preach nonviolence and the authorities continue to violate these people's civil rights and perpetrate violence against them. Teach-ins will help, but at some point, enough is enough. And when does that point come? I know my position will be a bit controversial. I'm not advocating violence, simply asking the question of how long do we continue to accept the violence against us before we react? Kevin. All right, let me go back to what you said. How long would it take me to react if police began manhandling Kathy and pepper spraying her? This is the risk that the nonviolent movement takes by definition. I'm sorry. At what point do you pull out a hammer and start smashing people who are attacking you? If you are committed to nonviolence, the answer to that is never. Never. If you remember the movie Gandhi, and I believe the movie was fairly loyal to the actual history of Gandhi as he led what started out as a peaceful revolution against the British. It wasn't until after the British left and partition had to occur that the violence really began, and that was Indian against Indian. I'm very simplifying it. I understand that, but just bear with me here a second. The whole nonviolent movement, whether it was Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. in this country, or Jesus in 2,000 years ago, the nonviolent movement means just that. If you remember in the movie Gandhi, how many people who tried to approach the, what was it, the British compound or salt processing plant, I forget what it was, but wave after wave of wave after wave of Indian people, men and women would approach and be beaten to the ground. Another wave would approach, be beaten to the ground. Nobody raised their hand against the troops that were hired by the British to do this violence to them. So what would I do if Kathy were pepper sprayed and manhandled? I think she would understand fully before she ever went to the demonstration what the risks were and what she had to endure. I know I would. I've been there. So now, more on this when we come back. Stay with us.
And I remember misinformation follows like a plague. Nobody knew from time to time if the plans were changed. If the plans were changed. You can beat us with wires. You can beat us with chains. You can run out your rules, but you know you can't outrun the history train.
Standing up to the flying monkey right, it's Mike Malloy.
"21 past the hour." So, answering Kevin's email here about how to deal with violence at marches, and Kevin makes the point that eventually people crack when peaceful demonstrators, when they are attacked by police or by the authorities. And I hate to say it, but I think anyone who trains or has worked with nonviolence will tell you that is what it's all about. That you cannot, if you are committed to peaceful, nonviolent resistance, then you can't fight back. Do you have to be pepper sprayed in the eyes and the mouth? Well, you try to protect yourself as best you can before you get in a situation where that may occur. But if it does occur, of course, you won't react because at that point you're on the ground trying to breathe, and you may die depending on your physical condition. If you have different attendant physical issues that you're dealing with, if you're on certain medications and you get pepper sprayed in the mouth and the nose and the eyes and the ears, yeah, you could die. So, as far as being hit or shoved or pushed or beaten or arrested, the idea behind nonviolence is what it says. Passive resistance. Now, as Kevin points out, Kevin is reacting the way most of us would react. At what point do you say enough of being beaten to the ground is enough? If you are committed to nonviolent, massive resistance, that point never comes because you understand before you take part that no matter what sort of violence is perpetrated against you, you will not respond in kind. That's a tough one. That's why very few people can handle that, because the reaction is to fight back. And somehow, I think the few times I have attended some very minimalist nonviolence training myself, that has been one of the toughest things that the organizers or the facilitators have to explain and have to teach, is that nonviolence means nonviolence. And that when you put yourself up against the state in any one of its many, many forms, and you are doing so with the idea that you are not going to fight back, then you must hold to that. Now, the theory is that you gain the moral high ground in doing this, that you understand from the beginning that the laws or the policies that you are resisting with your body are immoral, unjust, anti-life. You understand that. So enforcing the state to respond to your presence with force, in other words, using passive resistance to force the state to respond with its kind of force, gives the movement the moral authority that's necessary for the movement to succeed. Take a look at the American Civil Rights Movement. Take a look at Indian independence. Take a look at, and then on the other hand, if you want to see how violence reacts, take a look at the struggles in Northern Ireland, the struggles in Algeria. So the answer to Kevin here, he says the teachings will help, but at some point enough is enough. When does that point come? If you are committed to nonviolence, that point just does not come. You have transcended that point before you even begin. You have decided inside yourself that point doesn't exist. Now, that's difficult. That is damn near impossible. I've never been put to that test. I don't know if I could do that. At this point in my life, I don't know. I really don't. But that's a question for everyone to answer if they are going to participate in what is defining itself as a nonviolent passive resistance. Now, the way to overcome it is to put so many people in the street that the police can't. I mean, how in the hell do you knock heads or pepper spray 5 million people? Well, you don't. If you are the police state and you're going to react to that, you bring out the machine guns. You bring out the troops. But there is no police force on earth that is going to hold back the tide of 3 million people walking down Michigan Avenue in Chicago or Fifth Avenue in New York or Peachtree Street in Atlanta. There is no police force on earth that will be able to confront 3, 4, 5 million people who are involved in civil disobedience and passive resistance to policies of the state that are no longer acceptable. So, that's the answer, Kevin, as best I can do. More on this when we come back. Stay with us.
Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see all your life. You were on.
Ten before the hour. The other topic that we talked about last night that got some comment in my email box this morning was the testimony by, or not testimony, but this new book by Jose Rodriguez, who was the CIA director appointed by Bush, who was responsible for the policies of torture. Not individually, but he had to sign off on them. And he has a book out, and his crowing about how torture works. When anyone who understands that horror understands fully that it doesn't work. You get from the person being tortured exactly what you want, except for one thing, and that's the truth. You will get anything to make the torture stop. And it's my understanding that when a person figures out, the person being tortured, who figures out what it is that will stop the torture, then there's a torrent of information about that. All of it, of course, irrelevant to what the torturer is trying to get from the person he's torturing. That makes sense? Rodriguez, on the other hand, says, oh, no, we, it was very effective. We got all kinds of information. Just about every authority under the Bush crime family, now that authority has disappeared and it's been handed off to the Obama administration, all of those people from the Bush administration, especially the military or the people involved in interrogation, have come out and admitted that no good evidence was developed as a result of torturing people. Nothing. But then you have a freak like this Jose Rodriguez who continues to maintain that torture's good, torture's effective, torture works, torture's wonderful. Michael and Roswell writes, some of the Rodriguez business undoubtedly goes back to the 1954 so-called Doolittle Report, which advised the CIA at the time that the enemy we faced then was so dangerous that we had no choice but to adopt methods and techniques that would go beyond what that implacable enemy would utilize. So a variation on we had to destroy the village to save it has been in effect for almost 70 years. It's no wonder that a sociopath like Rodriguez was in charge of the CIA's operational division. Sociopathy has been policy for a long, long time. Michael and Roswell. I'm not familiar with the Doolittle report, but as Michael points out, advised the CIA that the enemy we faced then was so dangerous. Who was the enemy we faced then? Well, you remember who. The communists, the international communist conspiracy. We had just come out of the Korean War, so-called. There was ample evidence that while American troops were willing to annihilate South Korean civilians, because I guess it was difficult. You know, they all looked the same, that kind of an attitude. But the atrocities that were committed by American troops against South Korean civilians is documented. Nobody talks about it. The Korean War is the forgotten war anyway. You know, we lost, 54,000 Americans in that one. God only knows how many Koreans died. But it's another little blip in American empire, in American resistance to the Soviet empire. It's the forgotten war. There are Korean veterans. They are starting to disappear, too, as the World War II veterans are disappearing. And nobody remembers. Nobody remembers the Korean War. I remember the day that my grandmother, I was very young at the time, but I remember the day that my uncle came into the house, in my grandmother's house, on a Sunday evening. And he was all agitated, and my grandmother said, "What's wrong with you?" And he said, "The North Koreans have just crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea." And there was a gasp. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I was a little kid, like, what? And I remember, this is how weird it was, going to church with my grandparents that night and hearing the preacher standing in the pulpit. I was a little kid. The preacher said, "Tonight will mark one of the darkest days in American history." I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But nobody remembers the Korean War. All that to get to my point, which is the atrocities committed by American forces in the South and by North Koreans in the North were almost unspeakable. That's where the movie The Manchurian Candidate comes from. The torture techniques that were used by the North Koreans are torture techniques that we have adopted. And let me remind you, anyone who needs reminding, when the Japanese High Command was put on trial in Tokyo Bay, members of the Japanese military who were convicted of using so-called waterboarding or controlled drowning, which we use now, I know we don't use anymore, right? Those members of the Japanese military were executed for that, for waterboarding. Executed by American firing squads or American executioners hanging. I think most of them were executed by firing squad. And now we had 8 years of an administration who told us, oh, no, well, waterboarding, it's just, what did this filthy, stinking pig Limbaugh say one time? It was like college fraternity hazing. Well, to paraphrase somebody, you give me Limbaugh and waterboarding technique, and I'll have that fat son of a bitch confessing to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln within 30 minutes, within 3 minutes. But I digress. Some of the comments we had from last night's Fun Fest here on the Malloy program. I'll see you tomorrow night. Take care. Keep it lit. I'm Mike Malloy.
The Mike Malloy Show. Talk radio matters here.
In the air, from those nads in Tiananmen Square. It's coming from the
25 before the hour. We're focusing a little bit here on, some comments about what we were talking about last night. The violence, the violence that is showing itself at some of the Occupy demonstrations, certainly yesterday. Violence that obviously has nothing whatsoever to do with the Occupy movement in spirit or in fact. And the people doing this are doing it to discredit the movement. And if the movement is to be discredited, one has to assume that attempt is being made by people on the other side of the issue. The other side of the issue is fairness, justice, economic justice, equal opportunity. You know what the issues are. So who's on the other side of those issues from Occupy? That's right. So at the same time, this awful conspiracy that exists of media, especially electronic media, to send the cameras and the photographers to the scenes of violence. Forget the fact that there are 50,000 people peacefully resisting capitalism. If there are 3 who are throwing bricks and smashing windows, those 3, not the 49,997, no, those 3 will get the cameras. The other 49,000 will get nothing. Bruce Enberg writes, violence plays into the hands of the police, and the description of the vandals yesterday suggests they are professionals. Well organized and all dressed in brand new clothing, if the Occupy protesters attempted to interfere with these people, whether they are plants or not, the so-called bad apples will be protected by the police since they serve their purpose. Have you heard of a single vandal being apprehended by the police? The only solution is massive numbers so that the police are overwhelmed by the peaceful protesters. Exactly the point I was making before the break. If you have 3 million people walking down a major thoroughfare in one of America's major cities, there is no way to resist that. That's why I'm being very oversimplifying this completely right now. And I understand this, but the larger point is what the larger point is. Peaceful resistance is just that. But here's another oversimplification. How many times have you seen video from massive demonstrations in France or in Germany or in Italy or in Spain where there is a police presence, but the numbers are so huge that the police understand there is nothing they can do, at which point usually the National Guard in these countries is put on alert, or the Army, because this is, it ceases being a police, it ceases being a law and order issue and becomes one of how do we contain 1 million, 2 million, 5 million of our own citizens who are on the move. Now, if that were to happen in this country just once, and how many times have we talked about this? One day of 10, 15, 20 million people in the streets, in the cities of the United States, then the points of debate would be realigned completely. You put 20 million people, 20 million Americans, that's not even that. What is that, 8% of the population? It's not even 10%. You put 20 million people in the streets in this country, what do you think would happen? Do you think these goddamn white-shirted freaks, these cops in New York, these supervisors, would walk up to a crowd that size and pepper spray the girls on the front line or the boys who are holding signs? Do you think that would happen? Of course it would not. Who said it? There's safety in numbers. Massive nonviolent resistance. If we're serious about ending the control that the 0.1% has over everybody else, if we are serious about the corruption of capitalism and bringing it to an end, if we are serious about the warmongering nature of this administration and just about every previous American administration going back to Teddy Roosevelt, if we are serious about economic justice, if we're serious about justice, period, then why don't we have 15, 20, 30 million people in the streets just once? One time! Once! That's all it takes. I've never been able to answer that question. And why do I scream it? Because I get very frustrated. We don't yet live under a military dictatorship. We don't. We do still have some movement, the ability to move, to move this way, to move that way. We still have the ability to resist. None of us really yet believe that there's such a thing as a First Amendment zone. The whole goddamn country is a First Amendment zone. A lot of us still believe that. A lot of us still believe in the Fifth Amendment. A lot of us still believe in the Eighth Amendment, the 10th Amendment. A lot of us still believe this stuff. Now, the right-wing crazies and some of the left-wing crazies will continue. Most, if not all, right-wing crazies, a few of the left-wing crazies will tell you that the police state is coming. The police state is coming. The police state is coming. Oh, they're building concentration camps. Oh, they're doing this. They're doing that. Well, then why are we just sitting here? If that is true, when do you start your resistance? After the streets are filled with troops? After the Constitution has been suspended? Ask Japanese Americans, the ones that are still alive, who were citizens of the United States. What happened to them when the great liberal, and he was, FDR, ordered American citizens into detention camps because of their race? So when do you resist? When do you put 30 million people in the streets? If the time were to come when a right-wing fascist coup occurs in this country, and it has come close a couple of times, and Obama's not the man who's going to pull it off. Come on. A right-wing fascist coup will come from the right. Obama is what Obama is, but he's not a right-wing Nazi. He just isn't. I mean, come on. We have plenty of those wandering around. We have scores of them who work at Fox, the Rupert Murdoch terror organization. We have even more who populate and infest right-wing talk radio. We have them out here with these crazed goddamn jumping in the bushes right-wing militant groups, run around in Idaho and Michigan brandishing their weapons, with their big-ass beer bellies and their shaved heads and their little funky tattoos. That's where it's going to come from. It's not going to come from liberals, progressives, left-wingers, communists. It's not going to come from there. And it's damn sure not going to come from Barack Obama. So, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? How many signs and portents do there have to be? How many times do you have to read, the 14 defining characteristics of fascism before you get it? How much history do you have to know about? How many trends do you have to witness before, a light bulb like in a cartoon goes off over your head and you go, this is not the way it's supposed to be in the United by God States of America. How many times are you going to just sit there while these crazy right-wing Christian ministers or right-wing Islamist imams or whoever the hell it is who is preaching this violence? Now, in this country, it just so happens it's mostly right-wing Christian preachers. But, I mean, seriously, this is a question I think everybody has to think about. If you're a citizen of this country, if you live here, if you have a stake in this country, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, mamas, daddies, cousins, whatever you have here, how long are you going to watch all this happen and consciously decide, well, no, I don't think I'll go out in the street today. No, I don't think I'll participate in a massive 30 million person march for justice. Nah, not today. Maybe tomorrow. Well, maybe not even tomorrow. I've got something I got to do tomorrow. This is the part that is so sad. That's the word that pops into my head. So sad for me is to understand the necessity of putting that many millions of people in the street, if we're serious, and how far we are away from actually doing it. Think of this. We were supposed to be a nation of, by, and for the people. The founders wrote of government deriving its powers from the people governed. Voting was to be the key. The right to vote required 200 years of hard-fought legal battles to ensure that we, the people, meant all Americans. Today our vote is nearly meaningless, made so by a process of candidates' half-truths, distortions, and lies. Vicious attack ads have replaced discussion of the issues that matter most to our nation's survival as a republic. The launch of Voters for Justice means this madness can stop. Voters for Justice is an independent political action committee providing information necessary to honestly evaluate a candidate for political office. Unbiased information regarding a candidate will be available at votersforjustice.org, including worksheets to assist in making a decision. Contributions can be made to support this critical effort at retaking our system of self-government. The time is now. The website is votersforjustice.org.